Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Amelia,
I'm Tom.
and this is Monday with Jesus, although it's Sunday, but hopefully we'll be sending to you tomorrow. Well, one thing I want to say before we start is we're coming up in, I don't know, 2-3 more weeks or so. We're catching up to where we were when we first started this weekly video with doing the lectionary stories, which we started, during the pandemic because we were very eager to somehow be communicating with people about the stories. So we won't be continuing week after week like we have been once we reach that time. All of the videos are on our YouTube channel, Go Tell Story, so they're all there. And pretty, they'll be a little bit dated in terms of things we might say, but not in terms of the story and the commentary. We did have some places where we missed some weeks where we took breaks or whatever, so we'll try to fill those in so that we have a video for every single lectionary gospel story. So that's my announcement. And now Tom's going to tell the story of Emmaus from the Gospel according to Luke.
So here we are. On that same day, when the women had gone to the tomb and found him not there, two of them were going on the road to Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and they were talking about all these things that had taken place. And as they walked and talked and discussed, Jesus himself drew near and walked with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are these things that you're talking about as you walk along?" And they stood still, looking sad. And then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, said to him, "Well, you must be the only visitor to Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have happened there in these days." And Jesus said, "What things?" And they said, "The things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in word and deed before God and all the people, and how our leaders and chief priests handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. And we had hoped that he was the one who would redeem Israel. And it's now 3 days since all this took place. And some of the women in our group amazed us this morning. They went out to the tomb, and when they didn't find his body, they came back telling us that they had seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Well, some of the men in our group went out, and they found it just as the women had said, but they didn't see him. And Jesus said to them, "Ah, you fools, and slow to believe all that the prophets have said. Wasn't it necessary for the Christ to suffer all these things and to enter into his glory?" And then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he opened to them all the things in the scriptures concerning himself. Well, they were getting near to the place to which they were going, and he was pressing on, looked like he was going ahead, but they strongly urged him and said, "Come in and stay with us. It's almost evening. The day is nearly spent. Come and stay with us." So he went in to stay with them. And when they had gathered for dinner, and were at table, Jesus took bread and he blessed it and he broke it and he gave it to them. And their eyes were opened and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. And they said to one another, "Whoa, didn't our hearts burn within us as he talked to us on the road, as he opened to us all the things in the scriptures concerning himself?" And getting up that very hour, they went back to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 gathered together and saying, "The Lord is risen, and he's appeared to Simon." And then they told their story about what happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread.
Oh, that's great. Thanks.
So that's the story.
The story. Whoa! I like the way you said that. Was that like, weren't our hearts burning within us? All right. Okay. Well, the beginning of the story, I kind of chuckled to myself. At church this morning, the final hymn was "He Lives." So we're all singing, He lives, and he walked with me, and he talked with me. Sounds like it's straight out of this story. Jesus is walking along and talking with them, but in this case, they don't know that it's Jesus.
Right.
Yeah, so that's pretty significant.
Yep.
And he doesn't tell them. Like,
Right.
I mean, when in the Gospel of John, which we did for Easter Sunday, Mary doesn't recognize him either. She thinks he's a gardener, but right away he says Mary, and she recognizes him. But in this case,
they walked the rest of the day.
Yeah. So what do you make of that, Tom?
Well, I think this is an insight into the character of the stories that were being told. This is a classic trickster story. In the trickster stories in Africa and the traditions of tricksters, of which there are several in the traditions of Israel, the longest being Joseph with his brothers. But, there are several stories like this. And they're all delightful. What I don't know what I make of this is that Jesus is he's playing the trickster, and he does that again then when he breaks the bread and they recognize him and he vanishes from their sight. The spirit of the trickster stories is always a spirit of good humor and discovery, of surprise. And so that's the case here, where, the listeners and the storyteller know something that the people in the story don't know. So it's just a delightful story.
They don't recognize him, and they say, one of Cleopas, I guess, says, "You must be the only stranger in Jerusalem and doesn't know what happened." I mean, what would be the attitude you think he's, saying that? How's he saying that?
Well, he's saying that as a straight out question, but he's also kind of, I don't know.
It seems a little bit like a put down or something.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of a put down. You must be, how stupid can you be that you don't know what had happened there in these days?
And that only increases the sort of irony or the humor or something.
Yes.
He's talking to Jesus. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Right.
And it goes on.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, because then they also make a comment about the women.
Right.
So talk about that a little bit.
So they put down Jesus, then they put down the women who went to the tomb, and of course, they came back saying they'd seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Well, they didn't believe that. So some of the men went out, found it, but they didn't see him. So they put down the women and their report. So
Yeah, it's right after that Jesus says, I think you said you fools.
yeah,
The NRSV says, let's see, I'm looking at oh, how foolish you are.
yes, it's okay. It's
Yeah.
just a little formal, and it doesn't catch the spirit of the teachers in antiquity would frequently, make fun of and call their students fools. So this is Jesus in the best traditions of antiquity, and it's not, oh, how foolish you are, but it's, you fools, you stupid idiots. It's a
Yeah, we don't like to
put
think
down it's a put down in response, but
yeah.
it's one in good humor.
Yeah, okay. All right. So then he proceeds to talk, well, let's see. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted them the things about himself. Do we know what that refers to? I mean, I think I've heard this interpreted as like the suffering servant motifs in Isaiah or something. I mean, what do we know? Do we have
Well, we know
chapter verse of what Jesus is referring to there specifically?
there is no chapter and verse that talks about a suffering Messiah. And that's what he describes, is wasn't it necessary for the Messiah to suffer all these things, enter into his glory? But there's no place in the Old Testament where there is mention of a suffering Messiah. So the suffering servant in Isaiah is not a messianic figure.
Oh, right.
And there are no descriptions of the Messiah in the Hebrew scriptures that name the Messiah as one who would suffer. They're all victory stories. But there is a pattern, and Bob Tannehill, in his great book on Luke Acts, says there's a pattern of leaders being who suffer. So Moses is put down and attacked by the people of Israel. Jeremiah is thrown into a well. There are a number of figures in the Micaiah ben Imlah is nearly killed. So there is a pattern of prophetic proclamation, response by the people of hostility and suffering, and then of the vindication of the prophet. So there is a pattern that is fulfilled of leadership of prophets and persons who might be associated with messianic traditions.
Yeah. So Jesus interprets the scriptures. I think that's interesting to think about too. He's just quoting them, but he's helping them to understand the scriptures in light of what's gone on in their day, his day, recently. recent, very current events.
And his hermeneutic is a narrative hermeneutic. He makes connections between stories. He doesn't talk about theology or things that are more abstract. He makes narrative story connections.
Yeah, well, that makes me think that this story of the, we often call it a walk to Emmaus, has a lot of stories embedded in it, or a lot of storytelling going on.
It's a storytelling festival.
Yeah.
So the two tell the story of what had happened in Jerusalem, and the women. Jesus tells the story of the things that point to a suffering Messiah.
Well, the women had told the story of what they saw at the tomb.
Right.
I mean, they report on that
Right.
story, right?
And that's so the women tell their story.
Right.
At the dinner, they tell each other, didn't our hearts burn within us?
Right.
And then they go back to Jerusalem and they tell their story about what happened on the road. And before that, the 11 tell their story about that he was risen and it appeared to Simon.
Right.
So there's storytelling going on all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Okay. Good. All right. Well, just to back up. So they come to the village of Emmaus. So where's Emmaus? Emmaus what's it say?
About 7
from
miles.
Jerusalem. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they want him to stay with them. I guess they really were enjoying his company, or they were enjoying his interpretation of scripture.
Yeah.
And then that's repeated. You got a little verbal thread going on here that he stayed with them. What's that word stay? Is that a significant? I don't know.
Well, it is that he went in to spend time with them, that he that's the occasion.
It's the same word as abide, right?
Himself.
Isn't it the same word as abide? Maybe.
Yeah.
Hear a lot about, and I guess
Meno.
Yeah.
In Greek. Yep.
Okay. It's not just they urged him strongly. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Not knowing who he was.
Yeah, not really. Yeah, that's right. They didn't know who he was at that point. So then you've got this kind of ritualistic, where we heard this before. He took bread, blessed, and broke it and gave it to them. That sounds pretty familiar.
Well, it is. It is a quotation of what Jesus said at the supper. And so it's just a quotation from the Last Supper story. Took bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them.
Also, the feeding of the 5,000, is that in Luke? Yeah, does the same kind of thing.
Yep.
And then
it's a major verbal thread. Yeah,
right. So then they recognize him, right? After that.
Yep.
So he makes, he said,
their eyes were opened.
Yeah.
And they recognized him. So before that, they were caught up in their own grief and so on, and couldn't see him. It's the same dynamic that was apparently present with Mary Magdalene
at the
tomb.
Yeah.
That she was so caught up in her grief that she didn't recognize him. Thought he was the gardener.
So is there some transformation happening in this story?
It's the transformation from grief and despair to joy and delight. And I don't know, good cheer. It's a story that invites laughter. And so it's a story about the transformation of the two of them from being defeated and discouraged to being overwhelmed with joy.
And as soon as that happens, he vanishes.
Right. Typical trickster.
Is that Is that part of it? Is that part of the genre?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but they don't seem to be, I don't know, discouraged or disappointed or
Oh,
anything.
no, not at all.
Yeah, they're energized. They go all the way back to Jerusalem.
Right.
Okay, great. Well, let me see if there's anything else I wanted to ask about. I guess not. Well, I'd want to ask what we always ask is, how does this story connect with ministries of peace and justice?
I think that one of the ways that this connects with ministries of peace and justice is that it is a spirit of ministries of peace and justice, of good cheer, of optimism, of hope. Sometimes the demonstrations and the things that we do get so serious and so confrontational that they've lost the joy and hopefulness of, at its best, those ministries are ministries of optimism, of hope, of promise, and of good cheer.
Mhm.
So I guess that's what I'd name as a clear implication. It's also the vindication of Jesus and of his way. And so there is the expectation that these prophetic signs that we do in demonstrations and in ministries of peace and justice will be vindicated in the future.
Another way I think of it is that even if we don't see Jesus, that can experience Jesus's presence with us and reminding us of the scriptures and of his teachings, and that's both comforting, energizing, and might help us in our work for peace and justice.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's see. Gallery view. Anything else you want to say before we sign off?
This is one of the great stories in the traditions of Jesus, and one of the reasons why it's a great story is that it's a story about storytelling, and that it has that spirit. So this is a clear indication about the spirit in which the gospel stories are to be told.
Yeah, and just as they went back, they said to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn within us?" And they went back and told. It invites us to consider where God has been present with us,
Right.
this day or recently, or
And in times of discouragement and
right,
despair,
especially,
and
yeah, right, exactly.
that Jesus is there,
Yeah,
with us unrecognized.
right, yeah, okay, all right. Thanks, Tom.
No,
Thanks.
my joy.
Yeah, thanks for watching, everybody.
Right.
Bye-bye.